Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is Dr. Joanna Martin, and she is the founder and CEO of oneofmany.co.uk. So yes, you've got a great accent coming up here. She's leading the world's fastest growing community of grassroots women leaders. So Joanna, welcome to the show.
Oh, John, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I am too. And you know, you're at kind of the confluence of a number of things that I particularly care about. And I think that the folks who are joining us care about. One of those is leadership. Mm-hmm. One of those is communication. And one of those is women leaders. So, you know, I would love to hear a little more about One of Many and, you know, where you are right now, what you're up to. And then let's talk about some of the, you know, great leadership lessons that you've learned from this community that you've got and, you know, what the men listening could learn from and benefit from, and what the women listening could learn from and benefit from.
Awesome. Sounds great.
So tell me a little bit more about the world's fastest growing community of grassroots women leaders.
Yeah, well, listen, it's a brainchild that actually came to me when I was breastfeeding my firstborn, James, in a darkened room. And I was reflecting, as you do when you've got that uprush of creativity that happens around the birth of a child, where you have all of these wonderful ideas and no time to do anything about them.
Yes.
But I was really present at that time to, there's a quote that gets bandied around quite a bit in the women's kind of leadership and personal development space from the Dalai Lama at the Vancouver Peace Summit in 2009, where he said, "The world will be saved by the Western woman." And I was kind of thinking about that, just to kind of paraphrase that a little. I'm not sure it's Western women specifically he was talking about so much as women who have access to resources. Do you know?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
And I was kind of thinking about that as I was sitting there quietly with a 6-week-old, nursing. And I think until that point, I had always thought that when we spoke about women leaders, we meant, you know, the Hillary Clintons, the Theresa Mays, the Kamala Harrises of the world, you know, these big politicians, you know, the Sheryl Sandbergs, the corporate kind of leaders that were very, very visible. But there was this moment there when I kind of thought, you know what? I actually think it's us, it's me and my neighbor and my sister and my gran and my aunt and my mum, women who are at a grassroots kind of level. You know, we are leaders in our own lives, and we're leaders perhaps in our community, or we're leaders in our family, or we may be leaders inside of our organization. But it's this immense army of women who care about the world and want to make the world a better place, and have resources to contribute. But as I looked at all of these women, I thought, God, if you could unleash those women into impacting the world in a bigger way. Yeah. But then I looked at them and they were all time-strapped, doing the mad juggle, you know, most present to who the hell is doing the school run and who's buying the Christmas presents. And I just saw this immense sense of possibility, because I'd been hearing this in my coaching business prior to, for many, many years, women who wanted to step up. But the main thing that stopped them was the juggle. And I thought, well, what we need is to equip women to be able to handle that daily juggle so that they can step up in a greater way into leadership roles inside of organization, inside of politics, you know, get us toward 50-50 kind of representation. So it needs to be a kind of double-pronged approach. One being supporting the women so they have the confidence, the capability, and the tools at their disposal to be able to make life work while that happens. Yep. And then two, from within then changing these organizations and these paradigms such that they become places that are much more open to having women at the table, do you know, because they'll
Yes.
give a lot of lip service to that, but it isn't necessarily played out in the cultures that are created in these spaces. So one of many was kind of born out of this desire to serve what I now affectionately refer to as grassroots women leaders. Some of us are CEOs, some of us are politicians, but the overwhelming majority are women who are, you know, they've got their job. They might manage a team of 6, 10, 50. They might have their own little small business, but they're busy changing the world for the better in every little part, every little corner of their world, wanting to make an impact.
Yeah, that is beautiful. That is so fabulous. I love that it started at breastfeeding and just went to the world.
Well, do you know when you have the little baby, you know, he was our first baby as well. Like I'd been eating all organic and only putting organic stuff on us and our skin and everything for years. And you know, he'd just been breastfeeding. So he was like this perfect little critter. And I looked out at the world and the world was a freking mess, you know?
And I have a 4-year-old.
Right? Exactly.
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you just don't want the world to stay like that. You know, we want the world to shift, to evolve, to be better, not just for women, but for everybody, right? To work better for everybody. And so that was, you know, that's where it all came from, which was kind of strange for a woman who started a working career as a doctor and then went via acting into coaching. It was kind of a roundabout way. That's where we ended up.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think and that I say a lot is anywhere, my context for working with and empowering women. And I love that. I do a lot of work with Women in Technology International and, you know, I got the honor of speaking at Accenture's Women's Day a couple of years ago. And my context for all of that is that no matter where on earth you measure, on any measure that matters to human beings, wherever women are doing better, everything's doing better.
Absolutely.
The environment, animals, you know, the economy, children, even men are doing better wherever women are doing better. And that was just a big wake-up call to me that I just want to do everything in my power to bring more women to the table and to get that female feminine perspective to have a whole lot more to do with the direction of our entire planet, you know?
I think it's so critical. And you speak to something really important. That was a big part of my genesis as well, I think, was I was reading that great book, Half the Sky. And also I was investing very heavily in an organization called the Hunger Project, which is a charitable organization, perhaps one of the world's biggest leadership training organizations, actually, bearing in mind their business model. Yeah. But in all of the research that any community-led development organization does, it's always women-centered programs that have the greatest impact in the communities. And I was reading all of this, you know, in the developing world and going, well, it makes sense to me that would be the same in the developed world too, right? Why would it be any different? And sure enough, when we've now been working with women really closely now for 6 years, and I don't have, you know, exact stats and research on this, but what I am seeing is every woman who steps up, gets empowered, handles day to day and steps up into greater levels of leadership, whether that be work or in her family or whatever, her family does better, her community does better, her kids do better, her whole team does better. Yeah. Everything does better when this woman invests in herself and her organization invests in her, and she really starts operating from this new place. And you're right. Every metric that counts, you know, we see it with more women in executive leadership positions, more women on boards. It's good for business. It's good for politics. It's good for the environment. It's good for ending poverty. You know, it's clearly necessary. I often say, you know, women are clearly fit for, you know, being great leaders. The question is leadership fit for women? And I think here in the developed world, we have to really look at some of the cultural paradigm that a lot of our organizations and politics and so on are existing within, to kind of go, well, what is it about this which makes it unappealing to exactly the people that you want in there to be able to make a bigger impact?
Well, I want to hear where you go with that. Let me start because I think I'm starting at the obvious place, and then I want to hear where you go from
Mm,
where I start. Okay, because
sure.
so uh, there's a few things that I'm going to wrap together here. First of all, I forget what it was that had me do this, but I remember. I was in Yemen. I went to Yemen and I spoke at TEDx Dais in Yemen. And
Wow.
right before everything, stuff was not great, but it wasn't what was going on now.
Mm,
And they were very proud that they had 50-50 men and women on stage at
uh,
TEDx Dais in Yemen, not known for being the greatest women's rights supporting country on earth.
that's
And
awesome.
isn't that awesome? And I came back and I started wondering why we don't have that in Europe and America, right? 60-40 if we're lucky,
Mm,
And I started asking my friends who ran TEDx events. And they said, John, that's easy. When we ask 10 men to speak, 9 say yes. When we ask 10 women to speak, 9 say no. It's hard to get gender parity.
mhm.
And so there are a lot of reasons for that, right? And I think maybe we'll talk about some of them. But what I do say is, uh, no matter what the reason, even if it's a really great reason, when you say no to an opportunity like that, you are also saying no to your opportunity to make a difference. So
Mm, mm,
please, consider saying yes more often. But here's the thing. I think that getting noticed by the group, public speaking, taking a leadership position, especially as a woman, it's dangerous. Look what happened to Jesus and Joan of Arc and Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy and Socrates.
mhm,
So people are scared, right? In general, people are scared. I think there's more to lose for women in some ways, given society's current construct and all that kind of stuff. Um, but it's never ever about fearlessness. And I see a lot of these fearless this and fearless that. I know what they mean, but my dad was in combat in Vietnam. He told me you don't want a fearless foxhole buddy. You want a courageous foxhole buddy, right?
mm, mm,
So I believe it is always an act of courage and generosity to step up and be willing to get noticed by the group for something that matters more to you than yourself. Now, I think that there's places you could probably go now about some of the unique perils for women and some of the particular difficulties. Does that did it all make sense so far? And is there a place that we could go that would be productive after that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things to pick up on there. I think to speak about, the TEDx, the TED organizers and they're shooting for 50-50. My challenge to them would be try harder. It really would. Because as a woman who has a community of women, I equally have a community of women who might not be packaged up as TEDx speakers yet or TED speakers because they haven't read your book, but they will.
Yeah.
Who have extraordinary perspectives on things. So I think there's two pieces here. One is, do you know what? We've just got to try harder, whether it's the gender issue, whether it's the race issue, whether it's a sexuality issue. If we're serious about going for 50-50, you just bloom try harder. Do you know? You
Yeah.
try harder.
Yeah.
And they might not have the same, put together bio pieces or the same put together everything, but they will be extraordinary speakers if you put them on those platforms. And you just try harder.
Yeah.
So there is that to say about that.
Yeah.
The second piece that I think comes in there is the unconscious bias that happens. And we know this to be true, and there's a lot of research to be true, whether it be a board selection committee, whether it be a board that's hiring for executives, whether it be a TED organization that's looking for who they're going to put on the platform, they will, unless they have done the work, unless they've done the inner work, they will filter their men differently than they will filter their women. They
Yeah.
will filter their white speakers differently than they will filter their, people of color that they're looking to speak, and so on and so forth. And we know that unless they've done that work, that is the case. So I think that there's a piece there that says, if it's important to you, do the work so you catch your own prejudice or your own internal biases to be able to make a difference there. And none of us is perfect at that, of course, but we need to be I think we all can be better at that work. So that's one little piece that I think is critical, and it needs to be spoken about out loud in these sorts of environments so that we can move closer. And that might mean, I had a really great conversation about this inside my own organization, because one of the things we've become aware of is that we are not as representative as we would like to be in terms of having diversity of race represented through our coaching team and so on. So I was speaking to a colleague of mine. She's one of my certified coaches. She's a woman of color herself. She's awesome. And she said, Jo, there is her perspective on this. Karen Roswell is her name. Her perspective on this was, Jo, you got to start sometimes with women who are willing to be the token person, do you know? And not everybody wants to be that. Not everybody wants to be that, but there will be enough of us that can step into that and be those pioneers and open the doorways. And then as we start seeing more, then more will come. So that was one little piece of her perspective. It's not mine, but hers. And I think it's the same in the gender issue inside of these sorts of things, that there will always be women who will be a yes to these opportunities, who will have that courage, as you talk about. Are they the ones that have necessarily got the best websites, necessarily got the best packaging all put together and getting themselves out there in the biggest possible way? Possibly not. And that's another piece, why people should be working with you, clearly.
Well, sorry, remember where you're going to go.
Yes.
One of the things that I definitely follow up that whole conversation with is when it comes to TEDx, they don't ask people who don't have something to say. They just don't. They do they do their research, and they really want to hear from the people they invite. And what I found through all the work I did with so many of the women that I've coached for TEDx is that typically in that scenario, and I'm not discounting any other scenario, I'm saying in that scenario, it's usually something like, I'm not enough of an expert yet. Right?
Yeah.
Now, men, they read a book about it 3 years ago and they're like, sure, I'll talk about it. Right? I read that book once. Women are like, I wrote the book, but I'm writing the second book now. And it's so much better. And I'm going to go ahead and write. It's like,
yeah.
So there is that in that particular setting.
And I 100% concur with you. And this is exactly why we do what we do at One of Many, because it's that imposter syndrome piece, which we tend to, a lot of the research tends to suggest that men and women suffer equally from it, but in terms of the inner feelings of it. But I really do think when it comes to execution, it does stop women much more than it does men. I really do agree with you on that. And I think, therefore, we do need to have a special support for women, in moving into these spaces. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Absolutely.
One little offering I have for you, and take it and run with it if you like it. It certainly worked for me to some degree. Not always, as you know, like on Necker Island, I was suffering from imposter syndrome. Like,
weren't we all?
Yeah, I guess we were.
I think Richard had it scun. I think he was all right. He was pretty comfortable.
I think he was all right.
Virtually everybody else was flipping out at some point.
Well, so here's my, I remember doing fractions. And if every fraction had the same denominator, the same bottom number, you just divided by that and got rid of it, and it made everything a lot easier. That's imposter syndrome. Let's just divide by imposter syndrome, because everybody's got it, and toss it out, and it'll just make everything easier.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. That was something that really struck me actually on our Necker Island trip, was meeting Halla Thomas Dotter. And, here is a woman who has run for president of Iceland. She was heading up the financial services, one of the only financial services companies in Iceland that didn't go bankrupt when Iceland went bankrupt, because they were bringing a feminine touch to finance, completely female leadership, right? Yeah. This is a woman who's done amazing things in the world, talking about her imposter syndrome and how huge it was for her, and how terrified she was, interviewing with Richard and Jean Erlang, the president of Virgin Unite at the time, for the job as CEO of the B team. And it was just it was a real moment for me, going, wow, You ran for president and you have imposter syndrome. Okay, I'm going to make friends with my imposter syndrome. I'm going to keep saying yes. And I think we all have to do that. I think you're right. I really do.
Yeah. That's cool. And that was an amazing, she's an amazing woman.
Oh, isn't she amazing? Absolutely incredible. Yeah. Absolutely incredible. So if we come back to the other pieces that I think were interesting from what you were saying earlier, I think there's critical pieces in here. It's always I think there's three pieces of getting women into leadership, right? One is the structural, right? The structural and the systemic. So I think there's a piece here around, it's got to be the basics. So one of the reasons that they might get nine no's from a woman and 9 yeses from a man is when push comes to shove, it's a hell of a lot easier for a man to jump on a plane. In most families around the world still, not all, but it's much easier for the bloke to jump on a plane and fly and be in another city for 2 days to do whatever they need to do and fly home again because they have a wife at home who's looking after the kids.
And we're seeing this with the pandemic, right?
Right,
this is
absolutely
demolished women in the workplace.
Absolutely. Well, the McKinsey report that's come out of women in the workforce showing that a full 1 in 4 women in corporate employment in America at the moment are looking at downsizing or stepping out of the workforce completely because of the impact of the pandemic on their work-life imbalance. I am blessed in that in my family, I'm the one who can jump on a plane, go do whatever, and my husband is very happy to take care of the kids. But that is an exceptional family still, unfortunately, rather than the norm. So the practicalities, especially for speakers, is such that it isn't always as easy. Now, we would expect that now that a lot more is moving online in this domain, that it does become a bit more of an equalizer. If I've just got to make sure that the kids are covered for 2 hours and I can come and deliver a keynote, much easier than delivering a keynote that requires a day's worth of travel, a day to deliver, and a day worth of travel home. So And we can map that across beyond just speaking into corporate boardrooms and leadership teams and politics, the whole 9 yards. So I think there's systemic kind of structural changes that would make it easier for more women to say yes more often. Then I think this internal bias piece, the unconscious bias, the unconscious stuff that we spoke about, or we spoke about a little already, which consistently needs looking at. And then it's what I call personal power, the women themselves and their personal access to power. This is the domain where we at One of Many work. We've got partners that work in unconscious bias. We've got partners that work in terms of supporting organizations with kind of structural changes and so on. But where we focus is on the woman herself, the woman for whom the door is ajar or slightly open or firmly shut, but she wants to damn well push that thing open. How do we equip her with the tools to sustainably step up into leadership? Because this is the other piece, right? There is a mythology inside of how women lead, which is that in order to be taken seriously, we have to just step up to ever greater levels of what I affectionately refer to as superwoman. That burning the candle at both ends, longer days, working harder, working more, bringing the bitch to the boardroom, the bossy kind of aspect. Law firms around the world are full of this woman, according to the lawyers in my community, and as are many hospital wards, actually, to be fair. There's this kind of thought that in order to be taken seriously, you have to be forceful and aggressive and hard. Do you know? Now that archetype, I call her super. And then she comes home and she gets the dinner on the table and she's taking care of the kids and everything's organized, or she's organized the house and the nanny or what have you. She's still the one doing the Christmas presents and making sure everyone's got a birthday present. And if the tap springs a leak, she's the one calling the plumber. She's doing all of it and she's doing it perfectly. So if we want to step up, the assumption then becomes in most women's mind, therefore I have to just be able to handle more of that. What we put forward in One of Many is there is actually a completely different paradigm of operating, which if we step into this different paradigm of operating, we can have just as much gravitas, we can be taken just as seriously, and we can work with our natural advantages as a woman to be able to sustain it powerfully. Do you know?
Yes.
So we talk about making the shift out of superwoman and her cousins, the victim, the bitch, and the martyr, and into what I call the 5 women's power types. And women need a kind of role model. And 6 years ago, when we launched One of Many, there were no role models of what I would now call, compassionate, strong, powerful, compassionate leadership. Now we have many, in the last 6 years, there has been a plethora. If we look at most of the leaders of many of the Nordic states, we look at my Shiro, Jacinda Ardern, and how she leads New Zealand at the moment. The Prime Minister of Taiwan, extraordinary women demonstrating power, gravitas, decisiveness, clear boundaries and clear strategy, sitting right alongside radical compassion and love, love in their leadership, which is exquisite to witness. And the way I kind of teach that to my ladies is that they're accessing what I call 5 women's power types. They've got a bit of warrioress in there. They've got lover, that they're looking after themselves, not lover in a sensual and sexual way, although she is still that center, but cherishing herself, looking after herself, making sure she's not burning out. They're accessing that mother energy of compassion and unconditional love. They're accessing queen, who has a vision for her realm and brings structure and strategy and decisiveness. And they're also accessing sorceress energy, this part that connects to whatever they call their divine, God, Allah, their higher self, whatever, their intuition. But they have, and all of them are slightly different, all of them have got slightly different access to all of us. We all have that, but they're centered in that space rather than just harder, longer, more, playing the game the way the game was played when my foremothers, grandmothers, aunts earned us a right at the corporate table in the first place,
Yeah.
It was played by men in a very masculine paradigm, still is largely, and we thought the only way, therefore, for us to be there is in that superwoman masculinized kind of way of operating. But if we show up just like the men around the table, we lose all of the benefits of diversity, right? We lose all of those benefits that bringing what I call softer, although most people get triggered when I say that word, but the aspects of our nature, that's what's needed in the spaces to transform them. So we've got to be able to bring our gravitas right alongside those pieces.
Well, I don't think that it's any mistake how the queen moves on the chessboard.
Right, yes.
And I think that what you just said is one of the things that I am always talking about when I'm working with women in particular, especially, is your natural advantages as a human, as a female. And, there are just so many advantages that get thrown out the window if women do that step up, be just like the guys. And, the other thing is, it's no mistake how the queen moves on the chessboard. And I think that men in these environments feel threatened. I mean, I think on top of the structural and the unconscious bias and all of that, men get a little scared, and feel like maybe they're becoming irrelevant and stuff. But what I keep thinking about as you're talking is how much men need this too.
Yes.
Like I almost died because I played that game. I slept 4 or 5 hours a night. I rah for my .com company. And then, when we went out of business, the extra stress of that, I almost died. And I know lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of men who are killing themselves slowly by working that way. And I just was on a call with someone who's got a 15-year-old daughter. And you know what? He's trying to figure out how to get more of that relationship back because he's really clear she's going to move out pretty soon. And that was her whole life with him, and he missed most of it.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I think that bringing the feminine, bringing female leadership, doing the things you're talking about, it's not just for women, right?
No,
it's like
absolutely.
We said at the very beginning, everything does better.
Exactly. And I think
Even
where
men.
we can feel, if we can get ourselves to a point where we feel great to bring all of who we are to our
Yes.
leadership, then what that will naturally do is start to shift and change the cultures in which we're leading. And if we can shift and change the metrics that we're measuring, if we can shift and change these things, not just the women, but in partnership, right, with men.
Yes.
But the thing is, I think it's tougher in some respects for men to kind of say we need to change this, because it's harder for a man to say, I think we need a bit more feminine energy around the place. I think we need to rest and replenish more. I think we should have, if ever we should have better replenishment day strategies.
Yeah.
That's going to sound. It's going to be difficult for a man to have that conversation. Do I think it'd be great if they would? Yes. But I think it's a voice that we can hear more from women, given the right environment. And then when it happens, that's when the culture can change, and it is better serving for men and women. Do you know, here's a guy, your client you were talking about just now, or your friend you were just talking about, it doesn't work for him that's the environment that he had to go to work in so that he missed his daughter's entire life. That does not work. If we were in a place where there was more parity, not just in the workplace, but also at home, where it was expected, and it was expected that he would take more of a parenting role. It was expected that he would be responsible for more of the housekeeping kind of side of things. If that was an expected, and that was the norm, this kind of partnership, then it actually would serve children better, it would serve men better, it would serve women better, and we could all contribute our impact in a way which my key thing that I always strive for is sustainability. Sustainable for the individual, sustainable for organizations, for the climate, for the world, for everything.
Yeah. So who are some, you've mentioned a bunch of female leaders in your personal life, in your as you've come to think about all this stuff and the experiences that you had that made this the thing that you pursued, and who are some of the influences that maybe they don't have to be famous, but
so I think, interestingly for me, it started because I had none. So I am one of three girls. I'm the oldest of three girls, but my mom was the tomboy with three brothers. So she was very masculine paradigm in the way that she operated in the world. My dad was one of three boys, and my two grandmothers, both my grandfathers died relatively early in my life, but my two grandmothers ruled their relative families as matriarchs, but from a very patriarchal place, from a very masculine paradigm. It was my way or the highway. This is the way it is. It was like, the Protestants versus the Catholics in our home. So it was, I was a girl who grew up in a girls' school thinking that femininity meant blonde, ditzy, lack of intelligence, and wanting the boys to like me. And that was it. And as a very intelligent, capable, top of my class kind of girl, I didn't want to have a bar of that, because I thought the two were mutually exclusive. Clearly, I could not be feminine and be capable and smart. So, after hours, I'd wear tracksuit bottoms and Blunston boots and hide my entire femininity. It was a dirty word to me until I was well into my 20s, which meant behind me I had a string of broken relationships where I would always be the bigger man, if you really want to piss off a man, be a better man, right?
But I do like Blundstones. Blunnies
they're great.
Are awesome.
Blunnies are great. So I had... And it wasn't until I nearly burned out at the age of 30. So it was when I had my first big speaking contract. I was working for an organization, personal development organization, and I was traveling around the world, audiences of 3,000 at a time. LA one weekend, London the next weekend, Sydney the next weekend. I mean, it was a very glamorous lifestyle. And I nearly burned out because of all of the reasons we talked about. I would fly into a place, I'd be on stage for 7 days straight, then I'd have a day to travel, and then I was on stage for 7 days straight again. It was nuts. Loved it. I mean, I was in my 20s. It was my dream, dream role. But there came a time just around my 30th birthday where I can't stand on stage today and say, you too can have a great life if you use these tools, when I'm falling apart at the seams, And it was then that I realized after haranguing a poor naturopath, that it probably was less about what I was lacking in terms of nutrition or whatever, and more an excess of what I now call superwoman energy, this highly masculinized, focused, driven, don't ever stop, aggressive kind of energy that I was taking into my life, which was actually cutting me off, not just from health and vitality as I was experiencing it, but also from a sense of connection to my higher self and my intuition. It was cutting me off from meaningful relationships with anyone, but especially, I wanted a great relationship. I wanted a great, love affair. And I didn't know how to connect with men. I had no role models. So for me, I then went and started studying femininity, the dirty word as it was for me, weakness and all of that I had associated with it. And as I stepped in more and more, where I kind of landed was really digging into the Jungian archetypes and recognizing that here in archetypes, I had 5 great roles, four from Jung, and then I added the warrioress because I felt like the world needs warrioress right now. But here were five archetypes, and I now call them the power types, that I can use as my role models because I didn't have them in my life. And I could learn and dig into them and go, how can I harness more of that energy in this situation? How can I respond from this place? What does this situation call of? And that's how I kind of got into it. Over that period of time, after my kind of near burnout, it was the first sort of wake up moment that it was femininity I needed to look into when I was actually at a health retreat with my dad. Once I'd earn a bunch of money in my role, and I was really proud of myself, and I wanted to give my dad a gift, and he needed to stop smoking. So we went off to a health retreat together.
That's cool.
It was so great. And at that health retreat, there was this couple, and they were in their 70s, John and Denise. I will never forget them. And they were as in love as the day they met, these two. I remember we were all doing a Feldenkrais class. There was about 50 people lying down on the floor doing this Feldenkrais class. And there were these giggles coming from the corner of John and Denise kind of, playing a bit of footsie while they're doing their Feldenkrais. Denise was riddled with arthritis, riddled with rheumatoid arthritis, in chronic pain. And that evening, I went up to the steam room with her because we just connected, me and Dad and these two, we connected. And so I went up to the steam room with her that night, and I was in the steam room, just she and I chatting away. And I said, God, Denise, what's the secret, And, her answer, and I was talking about in the context of relationship, and she said, her answer to me was, darling, I don't know that there's a secret. John just really loves me, and I let him. And that just sat with me so powerfully. She let him. The passivity of that, the receptivity of that, the spaciousness of that. And I went, aha, oh. And it was that first little moment of starting to get it, that maybe it wasn't about me pushing out, aggressively going after my goals, setting a goal, putting a timeline on it, all of that sort of make your move. I love Tony, but, it's so,
yeah.
And that had got me some results in my life, but it had also got me burnout and lack of fulfillment in my relationships and disconnection from my source. This little, and I let him, I kind of started to expand that, not just to a relationship between, a potential lover in my life, but to, and I let him, as in, and I let source, and I let myself rest, and I allow. What do I need to allow here?
Yeah.
And that's where one thing led to another, and I started journeying into that. But as I look at Denise now, she was so the full embodiment of lover. She cherished that rheumatoid arthritis-ridden body of hers. She cherished it. She brought all of that sensuality and sexuality to this beautiful relationship with John. She was so clearly in her queen. I saw so many interactions that week with, where she was so clear about what she wanted and what was best for all of us, and mother energy. She was just fully embodied what I now refer to as soft power. Do you know? And that was really the beginning of, okay, I got to figure that out. How do I do that?
Yeah. That's just so beautiful. And it's so profound, I'm just so moved by that. I'm over here crying.
She was a beautiful, beautiful soul. She was a beautiful, beautiful soul.
And that, and as a man, like you saying, like I was waiting, like what's she going to say, and he just loves me so much and I let him. I don't know what that hits, but it obviously hits something that's really deep and meaningful for me. And I think about my wife, Sharon,
Yeah.
whom I just love. And she lets me.
Yeah. And that is a gift, right? It is a gift for men. It is a gift that we women are never taught. We're never taught it because I don't know. I mean, certainly I can only speak from my experience and witnessing so many women in our community who are brought up feeling they're not enough and therefore do more. Do you know?
Yeah.
Through whatever unconscious programming.
Yeah.
Not just you are lovable, so just let it in. Do you know?
Yeah.
You can, just allow it. It's like a revolutionary statement,
Joanna, it reminds me of one of the, I mean, I don't know if this is profound or silly, but like one of the biggest moments for me, really, really one of just gobsmacked moments for me in my life is when it was pointed out to me that we call ourselves human beings. Like we're being. It's not human doing. And it's not some noun thing, It's like I am a human being.
Yeah.
And just the profundity of like whoever thought up that, like how did we even figure out to call ourselves that? And it's so right. And it was always right under my nose. And I never got how much just being matters,
And we spend so much of our life, and I think this is accelerating. It's been accelerating over the past 50, 60 years. Doing as our ability to communicate speeds up. God, I wish I lived in the 50s and 60s where if you wanted to send something to a client, you would have to write it out and post it to the client and then wait for it to come back. So you'd go and do rest and do other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
There's just something about that. And I think we are just speeding up faster and faster. We are exploring and evolving and having scientific breakthroughs faster and faster. And I worry because I think we don't spend enough as a race of people being and asking ourselves the big questions of, is this right? Is this good for humanity? The animal world, the plant world, the planet, is this good and right? And I think it is only in that place of beingness rather than doingness that we can do it, right?
I mean, and I just picked up, the meditations again, Marcus Aurelius, and was thinking about, like what life was like back then without a smartphone and no faxes and mail service wasn't really good unless you were, the emperor, and have time to actually meditate on things and think about like the meaning of life, and whoever does that anymore at all. And I think it's a massive loss,
Yeah. I am quietly optimistic that this great pause, as some people have been calling it, that coronavirus brought to us, has opened, certainly not everyone, but an ever greater number of us into, okay, I need more of that in my life. Do you know, I feel like there is a possibility that we're sitting on the precipice of right now, or that we're in right now, where we're going, okay, there were elements about that. And, here in the UK, we're back in lockdown at the moment. And there's kind of pieces about this that actually work better for us. Do you know?
Yes.
Work better for our humanity, work better for our planet. What are those elements, and how can we evolve in that direction rather than just in that unquestioned, march
more faster.
Faster. Exactly.
Well, that's something that we're talking about and taking on in my weekly global leadership synchronization calls. And what I brought to that group out of my experience with some of the folks I'm coaching in China is that they got through it much quicker. They went boop, boop, and, shut it down, brought it back, and now they're all back. And one of the gentlemen that I coach was saying, John, people were talking about how they were going to remember and they weren't going to travel as much if they didn't really need to. And they weren't just going to jump in the car or go someplace if they could do it on Zoom and it would be as good. And everybody's forgetting that. Everybody, like, it's going way back more to normal than I ever expected. Wow. And that scared me. This was back in June or something, whenever China started to come back. And I vowed to myself that I would remember that and I wouldn't do that myself. And I would do my best to grab the good things that came out of this very difficult. Like, I'm not saying yeehaw for everything, but what you're saying, I think, is really important. There are these aspects, and there's this, I mean, I almost feel guilty, like I still have work. I'm home with my wife and my 4-year-old. Dude, I couldn't be happier in some ways. Like, I don't have to go anywhere and I don't have to do anything but hang out with Johnny. When I'm not working, I hang out with Johnny and Sharon, like, and what a gift that he's 4 and I can do this now. Cause like in a year or two, he'll be off to school all day. And, so I feel so grateful for that on some level that, like I said, I almost feel guilty. But I think that there's a lesson, a bigger thing that you're pointing to that's really, really, really important. And I would just encourage all of us, and then I'll stop talking for a second. Yeah. I would encourage all of us, you and the people you talk to, like, we need to remember it and we need to keep it alive once we don't have to, I think,
I agree. Human beings want connection, right? So I think the expectation that we're going to be able to transmit completely online and we're never going to want to fly somewhere to go to a conference where we can connect and all of the extra stuff that happens around that, I think that's very unlikely.
I agree.
But do we need 4 plane holidays a year where we could perhaps make do with one, that requires a plane flight and, a couple where you're staying local? Like, these are the things that I think we can take that away. Things like, I used to, with our kids, every weekend we would go out Saturday and Sunday. We would find something to do out because I also work from home and I've always worked from home. So, this is my home office here. And so for me, the weekends were about getting out. But what I really learned from lockdown was I love my garden, that it's not about get away from the house. It's get out of the house. And I've got this beautiful garden and I started gardening, and we live in this area where we're surrounded by natural beauty. And I realized, okay, well, I don't have to do that every weekend. In fact, weekends at home are brilliant. The kids like them because they've been at school during the day, during the whole week. And it made me realize how little entertainment they actually need compared to what I thought they needed once we broke that habit, which was we go out every day. Do you know?
Yeah.
And these are the things that I think at a personal level we can kind of sustain. But what I think is even more critical is the lessons, to our politicians and to our corporate leaders and so on, where they can this is a great opportunity for changing structural things that have massive environmental and personal sustainability impacts. It's a great opportunity. And I really, really, celebrate the corporate leaders that are investing heavily in taking this opportunity to, I know there's major organizations just not moving back into central London with their offices, doing, staying relatively virtual and, having part-time coming in and out and commuting and so on. I mean, these are the things that where we can make a significant impact. There's always so much more to do, isn't there? But I think if everyone in their corner of the world can go, what do I do personally, but also what impact can I have in my community or in my organization that would sustain it at a systemic level? Like, if we can all just work in these 1-2 places all of the time, then I think that's how we change things. This is what grassroots leadership is about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I've noticed that's really cool about it is because it got just so put on us and it's so all encompassing, a lot of the things that were just there because they were just there kind of got pushed aside. Like for a long time, you couldn't do telemedicine via FaceTime.
Yeah.
But FaceTime apparently is like the most secure video solution on the planet. So why couldn't you do that? Well, because, the people who lobbied and have the software that costs 1,000 times more, but when this happened, it was like, okay, we're going to just move some of these things around, and I noticed that in the military with the work that I do with them, that's where I really noticed it. And I think that's pretty cool. There's, there is a little bit of there's some brittleness that's maybe getting broken and swept out that will let something a little more, a little better grow in.
Hope so, right? Hope so.
Yeah, boy, me too. Well, so what other things haven't I asked you about, communication or leadership or, brilliant things you want to say to women listening or men listening or both?
Yeah, I feel there's something, it's a tough question. What have you not asked me? But there's something here. I think there's something here around, because I know you have a lot of, men in your community as well. And I want to speak to something you said earlier, which is that feeling of, of being sidelined in some way or not as important or not as relevant or something. Because I think there's a couple of critical pieces around that from a woman's perspective, looking at our the men that we work with, the men that we love, the men that we, that are in our families. And I think the first thing is an acknowledgement that the paradigm, we've talked about this, the paradigm that we're living in doesn't work for any of us. So a recognition that in just the same way as our soft power, our femininity has kind of been demonized for women, I think, kind of sacred masculinity's taken a beating as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of boys are brought up by mums without a dad around, and they don't have good role models for what healthy masculinity looks like. And by the way, every human being has both femininity and masculine within us. We've all got yin yang. We've all got, all of that. I call that harmony. We always both have access to both, or ought to be able to have access to both. So it's not obviously gender related, but I think there is in parallel to we women being able to bring more of our compassionate selves and our softer selves into spaces safely. There's also something that we need to heal here around men and their relationship to masculinity that is not that does not equal domination and power over. Do you know? Because that's there's a piece here where where we want to shift from power over to agency and recognize that the masculine energy has like that immense focus, that immense, single-minded focus towards the achievement of a goal that is sustainable in the male body so much more easily than in the female body, because you guys have got a shit ton more testosterone than we do. When we run out of testosterone, we start using adrenaline and cortisol, right? But that ability to put the blinkers on and see something through and competition, that competition thing that naturally kicks off in masculine energy mode when we're in masculine energy mode, whether we're female or male. These are powerful qualities which, when harnessed towards a vision which is created from a compassionate view of what humanity and the world needs, if we kind of create our vision, I think, for the world from a more feminine space, all of us, men and women alike, create that from a place of collaboration, community. What do we really want? The beingness. But then we harness up, all of us, our inner masculine towards this, the competition, the achievement, the drive, the focus. I think that partnership, both internally and between men and women, could actually create a huge opportunity. So it's not that we don't, it's not that like stand aside because the women are coming in. It's no. It's like, like frankly, we're not there yet. We're really not there yet. When you look at the statistics, it's very rare for us to even be at parity in most nations, most boardrooms, most, so we're clearly not there yet. And I do feel that there's got to be a generation of pendulum swing, which is always hard when you're in the dominant position.
Yeah.
A pendulum swing of like, okay, we know it's right to have more women here. What do we need? How do we facilitate it? And what does it look like for us to take a back seat for a little while? Not step aside, but it's like maybe actually my role in this generation, and it is a generational thing, is different in just the same way that those of us with white privilege need to be doing a similar thing if we want to see any marked difference occur, in the kind of racist systems that so many of us live in. It's kind of like we got to shut up, we got to do the inner work, we've got to listen. We've got to listen and make space. Make space and shine lights, which, when you're used to being in the dominant role, then or whatever the appropriate term is, a more powerful role, in the cultural paradigm that we live in, isn't comfortable. But it's a hell of a lot more comfortable than what it is for those that are not. So I think men can be amazing allies for women inside of every area. And I think the place to start is in doing that inner work, looking at, okay, at home, what does partnership look like? What does partnership look like at home? And is it really partnership? Could, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, could your partner drop everything and go away for 3 days just the same way you could? Could, do you know how everything in the house works? I mean, don't get me wrong, Greg and I, we split everything. We've got our roles, I remember last time I filled the car up with fuel, for instance, but we talk about everything, and we have a way of being with each other that we share. And this, I think, is a critical bit. We don't just share the tasks, we share the mental load. And that is where a lot of, I think, the unconscious weight falls to women. So I think it starts at looking at home and recognizing that being of more service there is actually better for everybody.
Yeah.
And then also in the workplace, it's like, watch those unconscious assumptions that can make a real difference. I remember in lockdown, one of my, she's, those clients you have that you're in awe of their wisdom and their awesomeness. I've got a client that's like that in our program. She's extraordinary. And she came to one of our coaching calls and she said, I'm beating myself up because I was on a call, Zoom call. This is in the middle of lockdown version 1.0. And she said, and my boss, who was a man, said, well, listen, you take this. I won't share her name and I'll make his name up. So you take this, Mary, because James has kids at home and he won't be able to do it. And she took whatever the piece of work was and came away from that call and went, hang on a minute, I've got kids at home too. But just because I know how to manage my kids and keep, and do the juggle, and because I've been doing it for the last 15 frickin' years, my kids are not impacting our Zoom calls, whereas he's only just started doing it in the last 2 weeks. And she said it. Now she went back and had a very clear conversation and challenged that unconscious bias. And that again, these are the little micro wins where that manager then goes, holy shit, I really did. I'm sorry about that, and things can shift from there. Yeah. But it's those little moments of real partnership that can come out in terms of our workplaces and in terms of our home lives that can make a real difference, recognizing that both of us, all of us, can step more powerfully towards partnership, and it shouldn't take away from anybody. It'll feel different and uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be taken away from anybody.
I totally hear you. And the other thing that I think about a lot when it comes to unconscious bias, and this might be one more beat to our conversation if you've got time.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like this woman you're talking about, she went back to her manager and she challenged the assumption, and it sounds like she left him a way out, right? Like, instead of going in and just blowing up and being angry and, assuming the worst of him, she went in and said, hey, do you see what you just did? And he had a chance to go, oh, gee, sorry. I think there's going to be a lot of that, both on the racial and the gender and all the other things that we're working through. And I think that the key thing to remember about unconscious bias is that it's unconscious. And if we can make it conscious without making the person who did that feel like they are now no longer worthy to walk on the earth, we'll get further faster. Now, is that just because I'm a white old dude, or I'm open to it,
Well, I think there's two pieces to that. Absolutely. So she didn't show up in Superwoman and Bitch. She showed up in Queen energy and said, this is what happened. This didn't work for me. And here's what I'd like to reflect back. And it did open things up. Can she take accountability and responsibility for how he's going to respond to that? No. And I think we do need to be a little careful.
Good point.
We do need to be a little careful that we can't pussyfoot around these things in the hope that no one's going to get slightly upset or jarred or awkward, because awkwardness will come. But if we can create containers, whether they're containers at home or containers in our workspaces where there's safety around these sorts of conversations, where where it's okay, where we operate in a workspace where it is safe for us to challenge each other's unconscious bias, and it's also safe for us to say things imperfectly. It's okay for us to upset each other from time to time. I think we need containers like that, where there's rules of engagement, where it needs to be safe to be imperfect at it. Because you could interview another woman next week about this, John, and she would give you completely different answers to me about how she thinks it should be, right? Just as I have spoken to, different women of color in terms of what we should be doing inside of our organization to be better and more representative and more diverse. And they've given me completely opposite, takes on these. So I think what we need to appreciate is there's no right way forward. There's no right way for a woman to start these conversations. There's no right way for a man to, participate in these conversations. There's nothing right. What is right is that we make the change, and that we can create safe containers of safety, which again is a leadership act, right? That is a leadership act in and of itself.
Yes.
Setting a vision, setting rules of engagement, whatever the terminology is you want to use of how we're going to roll together to create the change that we want to make inside of any space. We create those containers together, and then we can do it imperfectly. And when we do it imperfectly, if he had responded, really badly, go, woo, you should, but then there was space for that to kind of be spoken about too. Or if she had come out and been triggered and angry, how dare you? She had space to go back and, repair the relationship. Then this is the kind of workspaces that we want to be in, right? The human ones.
Absolutely.
Where we can be imperfect.
It reminds me of one of the things I talk about a lot in business. This isn't always the right distinction, but I think one big difference typically between startups and big established companies is that if somebody screws up at a big established company, they kind of get thrown under the bus. But at a startup, if somebody screws up, I'm not going to fire them. As long as they understand the mistake they made and I know they won't make it again, they just got way more valuable to the tune of whatever that cost me. Yeah. So I'm going to keep them, you know? And I think if we dealt with each other a little more that way, and there was room, like you're saying, a container and an apology is acceptable. And we can talk about things and we can talk about talking about them. And, and we get that as we bump into these things over and talk about them and have these uncomfortable interactions, we're smoothing the bumps out in the cave, we're getting rid of the places where we bonked our heads or didn't know that didn't work for someone. And so, and I do think that ultimately it's a partnership, it's not about one side or the other. And when we partner together, I just think there's lots and lots of examples. You've talked about some of them, just how much better things go when it actually starts to look more like a partnership than some kind of monopoly,
Yeah. And do you know what, John? I am most excited. My vision for the future is, I think it'll be a couple of generations hence, maybe more, but certainly within 7 generations, when we don't have to talk about men and women anymore. We're back to humanity, do you know? And gender does lose its meaning, and it doesn't matter anymore, because we are all operating in a paradigm that celebrates everybody equally, irrespective of whatever discerning features. But my feeling is that it's going to take us a few generations of supporting those that have been, challenged by, oppressed by, depending on what terminology you want to use, the dominant white male culture that has been in power so predominantly. And I think, I think it's exciting times to be alive, right? For men and women, exciting times to be alive. I really believe, at a personal level, I really believe we were born for these times. There's change makers.
I totally agree.
Right. Yeah. Change makers like you, like the people who listen to your podcast, who care deeply. Yeah. And it's easy to look out at how challenging it is right now, and how hard it is, and how many awkward things happen in a day, and how many impossible things you need to solve by lunchtime at the moment, and go, this is too hard. But then at some deeper level, a big part of my soul goes, no, I chose this. We are born for these times, absolutely born for these times. So let's keep rising and supporting one another and stepping up to the challenges of these times, because it is a very exciting time to be alive.
I couldn't agree more. And that's where we'll end. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure, Joanna.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.